Hello, and welcome to Coffree with John. With me, John. I'm your host. Makes sense, my name's in the title. Get off my back! Okay, well, we're here in Los Angeles, and we're in the time of the coronavirus. We're about like 10, 12 days into it. We've been under county-ordered lockdown for about a week now. And as you can see, apparently part of our essential services here includes coffee. So it's a Los Angeles style quarantine. Well, obviously, you know, gotta do a coronavirus one. Get my long take on this one for posterity. And you know, and it's interesting. There's a lot to talk about. There's people doing a lot of analysis, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So for those of you in the future who are checking this out, coronavirus is a global pandemic. COVID-19 was this. It is this virus. It's like a flu. It's like a flu, cold-like, transmittable virus that enters your system. It apparently has stealth, like it's asymptomatic for the first 5 to 7 days. So people that are carrying it and transmitting it, they don't even know, they don't exhibit symptoms. So it's like extremely difficult to stop the transmission from or slow it down. And then once it gets in your system and it activates, you have it for a couple weeks, and you know, numbers vary because we're in weird times. So who you get your numbers from matter, and we'll get into that. But fatality rate anywhere from like almost nothing if you're under 18 or under 30 or really under 40 to upwards of like, you know, 10 or 15%, 60 over 60. And apparently the correlation is the highest at risk group is 60 and over with underlying health conditions. And then it seems to be like particularly lethal for people in that category, to the point of being like a severe threat to their life, which is something to be taken seriously. And to be honest, in the overall calculation that people are doing, you know, most people aren't older, so it's the struggle of every person to think or feel beyond your own experience. So a lot of the overall calculations are like, oh yeah, it's not that bad. To be honest, that's sort of the common sense on the ground thing. It's like, yeah, okay, you know, it's gonna be super bad. But like the thing is like that's normally being said by people who are not in that particular group, and you know, obviously that's not fair, because having a large portion of the population be vulnerable to something like this is, you know, that's an important thing to take into account. So fortunately, most of the governments are filled with adults mainly, and they've decided to do these social distancing measures, which means you have to stay really far apart. Most of the heavy hit areas are having straight up social lockdowns and isolation, and so that's what we're engaging in right now. And you know, a lot of urban areas, man, they're just like, if you're in a one-room apartment and you're stuck in there, that is a mental health test that no one's scheduled. It's bad. But so, you know, so now that we're getting into it, you know, there's a few things to get into about it, you know, besides the medicine, because this being the world, nobody lets a good crisis go to waste. And also, especially in America, for all our faults, one of our great strengths is that we're free as fuck. And for sure, we're a bunch of like anti-authoritarian, reverse psychology, you can't tell me what to do, nobody's the boss of me motherfuckers. But what that's done is, you know, that also means that we always question everything, and we're starting to like, now we have a bunch of time. Everybody got time rich, okay? For sure, the circumstances, they're not the best. To be honest, the circumstances that it takes to shut the matrix down like this, if you think about, okay, cool, we got China, Italy, UK, France, Spain, Germany, US, like most major countries in the first world, basically all the first world, and then China for a long time, whatever world China's in. They're not first world. I don't know what world China's in. It's in some world where the Borg took over, and the Borg, they only had one weakness, and that was that the Borg was greedy for cash. That was it. Like in every other way, China's still just the Borg. Like you're like, oh yeah, they're kind of Zen. They're not really Zen. They're more Borg. And then it's like, oh shit. But what if the Borg was hungry for cash? Like they're like the Borg, and they're just like do. Except every time they go by a casino planet, they're just like, oh no, we got to gamble. I want the money. 5 of 9. We will run the tables. And so that's how I'm starting to see the Chinese. You know, it's like they're a terrible Borg. And don't get me wrong, the Borg is a totalitarian organism. They don't care about anything except control and assimilation. And it sounds a little familiar. It's striking a little close to home. So China's like the Borg with like a money habit, and so you can't trust any of their fucking numbers, right? So they get it, and so whatever dimension they're in, I don't know, they're in China dimension. It's a shitty one, and like their society looks pretty much terrible in every way. Okay, not every way. I mean, I'm sure you can find some, like any place, rich people living great. So basically the point is like all these places shut down, and we're getting to see what we're working with around, like with these different governmental systems. And America's system is decentralized, because that's our idea of freedom, is that a centralized government can't have too much power. It's a pretty simple idea. Now that doesn't mean they can't have a bunch of control. There's a bunch of levers they can switch. The federal government here in America, like they're basically in a control room for the spaceship of America, and they've got like 10,000 different levers they can throw. So the US federal government, they're basically in the control room of the United States. They have, I don't know, 10, 15, 20,000 levers in there, you know, and I might be underestimating that. And so these levers are all control mechanisms to steer the country. And, you know, the idea of the democracy here is that through matriculation from, you know, the people up through our reps, up through the House and the Senate, and through the, you know, judiciary, and they sort of create a bubble around the executive branch. And then, you know, the idea is that everything sort of like matriculates and then distills into whoever the president is. And then the president is this point of consensus for the free will of the country as best as possible. And then he gets that information, and then he informs the staff of like, okay, these are all the levers we should be pulling right now, right? That's sort of the theory of like a bureaucracy of American democracy. It's like that's what we're like really trying to do to steer the country or create it. Like democracy is supposed to be this sort of open source code of reality where we can all sort of program it together, and then we can go off into individual nodes, like business people or, you know, whatever it is, entrepreneurs, whatever, and free people, and like program our own like little realities, follows our own individual dreams. And then there's sort of like there's also collectivist dreams, like county level, state level, federal level, all these things. And then like kind of like there's supposed to be an overarching umbrella of like the federal level supposed to create this overarching level of a dream dome over a free country where all these other harmonious dreams are allowed to exist and manifest. And when there's like corruptions of those, people going outside of the law, or people disallowing people being able to make their own dreams within the larger dream bubble, you know, that's when law enforcement or control organizations are supposed to go in and fix those corruptions so that people's dreams can work properly and in accordance with the agreed upon law of the land, right? Obviously, that's the ideal version of the architecture of America, the Republic, you know. And the idea is now that I think a lot of people are seeing that outside forces came in and they either don't understand it, or they have their own agendas, or they do understand it and they still have their own agendas, have come in at various levels, but especially at the federal level, and started to like corrupt those means, right? Now here's the thing, the reason I bring that up is that, so the virus, which for the purposes of these discussions is a force of nature that's just rolling through, has triggered, it has given people a ton of free time, whether they wanted it or not, and it has triggered all of these sorts of introspections. And when Americans start doing introspections, at a certain point you get sick of just like looking at your own self or whatever, and you start to look outwards. And part of the responsibilities of being an American is that you do look around and you sort of like re-examine what's going on with your society. And so like these things are in the air right now as reaction to the virus, because it's triggered a bunch of time, a bunch of introspection, a bunch of analysis. People want to know, why does shit break, right? Because people get a sense that it's not just the virus. It's like, okay, now we're having to rely on the government, and when you rely on people or you're dependent on things, you put it under more scrutiny. Because now that your life or your livelihood depends on other people, you start looking into them. You want to know if they're doing their job right. Like, hey, are they being competent? Is it professional? You know, and a lot of us have been paying attention to politics and business and everything, because that's what responsible citizens do. That's what conscientious citizens of any country do. I guarantee you, citizens of every country are like going through some form of this right now. I'm sure the Italians, when they got told they were put on lockdown, they're like, hey, what are we doing here? Like, hey, because Italians, man, they fucking, like, full disclosure, I have dual Italian citizenship, like, and I'm not like, you know, like, I'm not there, but I got it in me, and like, I get it. It's like, hey, you know, what's going on here? Like, you're gonna shut down my life? Like, you better be calling the shots, right? And the Italians, they're super social. So you take away their socializing, and you better have a good reason. And, you know, apparently they did. But then you start examining your institutions again when you have downtime. And so that's happening across the world right now because of the virus. Yeah, you just do. You re-examine your institutions, your values, all these things, right? And that's what you're doing, especially while you're healthy, and you're just waiting around to see, in this like really sort of macabre game of wait and see. Like, I'm healthy now, maybe I won't be healthy next week. Is, you know, that's has to be in everybody's mind at some level. And that's what people are thinking. Anyway, so the virus is rolling through, and it's creating this overall analysis that's occurring, and we're figuring a lot of things out, and there's a lot of theories in the air. Like the conspiracy theory world thinks this would be a great time to do a bunch of anti-corruption raids at high levels, and yeah, it would be if their plans are true and everything, and everything's on the up and up. Yeah, it'd be like, this would definitely be a perfect time to do it. Be grand theater for everybody at home, and everybody, because of streaming shit in the first world. If you're watching Netflix and you watch Making a Murderer, or you've watched any of these like NCIS or any of these like Law and Orders, if you ever watch legal procedurals, which I think most first world media consumers have at this point, you've watched like some formatted criminal show that you get, and you understand how to process the information because of it. I think the general public in the first world they would know how to actually process watching mass arrests of anti-corruption, of like actual big bosses, not just like medium bosses. You're like, oh, they found this guy that you've never heard of that, you know, whatever, he's like regional drug dealer, and they brought him to jail, and you're like, yeah, okay, I mean, that's cool. But if they started bringing big names in of actual warmongers, people that we suspect, like that we know that they're warmongers, and that like, for whatever reason, they basically walk around in society in prestigious positions, and they have protection, like how Bernie Madoff was, right? Madoff, whatever, he did Madoff. So when Bernie Madoff, who cares, Bernie, so when he was rocking the financial world, he was untouchable. Like, his credentials were the best, and he's at the top of that world, and he was glorified, and there wasn't a hint of disgrace in the air prior to his fall, right? It was kind of like, I mean, he was just like in an untouchable position. And so there's a lot of people who have engaged in industries that are terrible. It's just we've been blinded to it. Like, we've been it's been our baseline reality that, oh, it's okay if like fill in the blank is able to make money doing this every day. But when you actually wake up and you look around, you go, no, you know what? It's actually not right. Because let's say you're a warmonger, and it turns out that, like, yeah, because you have an MBA mentality and you're concerned with growth of your product, and you don't have a conscience, and you determine that like your product is war or war parts or nation building, and you're only concerned with the fiduciary responsibility, then you have like, oh, I need 3% growth every quarter or whatever it is, whatever your growth projection is. And that's the only way you think about it. You're just like, oh, I have to grow my product, but your product is war. Well, then it turns out that in the real world, where we have ethics and morality and common sense, it turns out that like you're actually engaging in crimes against humanity to make your money. And that like now this person has no conscience. They've been going around thinking they're just doing business, but their business is actually choreographing wars and putting together wars and having tons of people die, because the more people they kill, the more profit they make. And now those people, what if they had kids and grandkids? So by like the third or fourth generation of their kids, they've already bred out all the empathy, and they're just doing business. And they've just been on that dark business path for so long, they don't realize the scope of the like the lack of ethics and the unconscionable nature of the business they're doing. And you know, since they're like 3 generations in, they developed contexts that have made them essentially immune to outside perspectives, to legal consequences, because at these points, they've greased all the wheels. I mean, if you think like a Mexican cocaine cartel has good connections, if you think Pablo Escobar can almost take over his country just on coke money, and you don't think that warmongers have established enough money, connections, and tactics to be immune to even high-level national prosecution, and that they figured out a way to make a lot of media outlets their own personal propaganda outlets, just to be like, hey, salute the flag, watch a B-2 bomber go over the Super Bowl, like, you know, sing a national war hymn before we play the game. Like, if you can't see that, like, they've blinded you to like what the true nature of what their product is, well, that's why we got coronavirus rolling through. Like, shock everybody. It gives everybody a shock wave of, hey, wake up for a little bit, look around. And it doesn't matter if it's connected to it directly or not. That's not the point of it. The point is just like, hey, it's a shock to the system. And the first thing people are going to figure out is like, yo, the healthcare system isn't even adequate enough to deal with an actual crisis. And that's what a bunch of countries are already figuring it out. I mean, and now we see what the government's reactions are to that problem. Like, the Chinese government, they just lied. They just like, apparently word on the street out there is like, they burned bodies, they hid the stats, they cooked the books, and then they lied to everybody. And they're like, oh no, they're like, oh hey, it's like, oh shit, everybody's dying. Like, the first doctor that found the virus, they sent him to their secret police, made him sign some sort of confession of like, basically like, oh, I'm a bad doctor, I'm making the party look bad, something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing for comedy. And they just like moved him on his way and treated him like a whistleblower. And because of that, you know, there's delay in the system. You know, if they had like taken his science seriously, maybe the virus doesn't get out of their country, or, you know, I mean, that's entirely possible. Definitely could have cut down on transmission. But we saw what the Chinese attitude is towards daily life. There was, okay, we're gonna put them through the secret police, and then when the bodies started piling up, they're just like, nope, we're gonna lie to you about the numbers, and we're gonna shut this down. We're gonna go door to door, pulling people out of their apartments and taking them away. And I mean, it's not like the Chinese media came back and said, oh yeah, you see all those videos of people getting dragged out of their apartments? Oh yeah, no, here's the videos of us putting them back in. Right? And it's like, why doesn't China get Black Mirror? Because China's living Black Mirror. Anyway, so we see China's response, and then, you know, and then it crept. We saw Iran, because Iran was next, and then Iran, you know, they're another totalitarian joke of a sham of a government, or, you know, they're theocracy or whatever. And so they having a press conference, and, you know, while they're trying to say they have it under control, the actual autocrat or whatever, the politician guy they had with him at the press conference, he actually had the virus and he's coughing, and which is like, that's dark comedy. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I want the minimum amount of death here. So that's, that's screwed up. But it is dark comedy that like he's out there trying to toe the party line. He's like sick. It's a whole thing. And then basically like a week after that, there's really no more news coming out of Iran. We got the initial reports like, oh, they got it, people are starting to die, and then we see their little dog and pony show from the politicians, and then boom, there's like no more information coming out of Iran. Then it hits Italy, and we're like, okay, finally, now hit a country where we think we can start trusting, like that we think it's transparent enough where we can start trusting the information that's coming out of there. And the numbers, they're bad. Like right now they have over 10,000 deaths. They have over 3 times the Chinese amount, which is like, it's more evidence that China was obviously lying. It's preposterous that China said they had like 80,000 cases and 3,000 deaths or whatever, and then Italy's got like, I don't know, whatever it is, like 40, 50,000 cases, and they already have like 10,000 deaths. Don't think the Italian healthcare system is that much worse than the Chinese one. And we'll find, here's the numbers are a mess. I worked as a year in the Army as a casualty informations officer at the theater level. So I was in Germany, and I had like 88 countries under us, included the Middle East, so included the theaters of war. So did all the casualty stats, had relay them to the Pentagon. So I'm familiar and comfortable working professionally with these numbers, which is to say, I can tell when the numbers aren't right, and we're just speculating as to like what the cause of those numbers not being, good or proper are. But we know the Chinese numbers are bullshit. So we know the Chinese numbers are bullshit, and the Iranian numbers, they probably aren't even like coming in anymore. Now, so the Italian numbers are the ones that we can mainly trust. Why? Because they have a nationalized healthcare system that's been in place for a long time. They're transparent for the most part, and they're actually trying to like help people, because they have a prime minister, they have a president that rolled in who actually is he ran on an anti-corruption ticket, and so he's actually trying to be transparent about everything. So that's why you can trust the Italian numbers right now out of all the different countries. Now, even they still haven't like tested enough people for the numbers to actually be completely accurate. So there's like a lot of guessing you have to do. That being the case, the numbers aren't great, but they're not wildly out of line with the other virus outbreaks like H1N1. In fact, H1N1 rolled through America without any precautions and almost no media hype. Infected 60 million people, killed 27,000. So we already have a model of what America looks like when we just let it roll through as H1N1, okay? And who knows what the discussions at the governmental level were in 2009 about this. Because you gotta remember, in 2008, the country was like pretty close to revolution, and the economy was totally bottomed out, almost crashed the global economy, and people were super unhappy with the TARP bailout. So the government might have discussed shutdowns in 2009, but they might have determined that they had basically saved the world's economy and that it couldn't take a shutdown at that time. So they just decided to let all those people die in 2009. But what we know for sure now is we have a statistical model from 2009 of what happens when the president decides to just let it run through the country without doing anything. And now we're doing a model where we're actually taking precautions to see what occurs and what the statistical model will be with this one. So regardless of personal theory or whatnot, at the conclusion of this, we'll have an American case for each, and that'll be good for data scientists, statistical models, and for designing healthcare systems. Because now when we move forward, if we can get past the politics of it, because on the one hand, now you're going to have a Republican and a Democrat president who both presided over a viral outbreak. Obama let it run through the country. Trump's doing these social measures to do it. And when we come out the other side, we're going to have trustable statistical data for designing a healthcare system, and we'll have both models. We'll have the model where we let it run through the society, and we're going to have the model where we took social precautions to deal with it. And these are two critical pieces of information we need if we're going to create a national healthcare system. Because the healthcare system for sure has to run the day-to-day stuff, but apparently pandemics are a normal thing, because we had one 11 years ago and we had a couple within the 8 years preceding that. So obviously a national healthcare system is going to have to be designed that can deal with these moving forward, because these are going to become more regular. In fact, I remember in the early 2000s, the medical community had projected that our overuse of antibiotics was forcing viruses, it was super mutating and evolving viruses to defeat antibiotics. And they said that within like 10 or 15 years, antibiotics were almost going to be useless because we were overusing them. And so now they've also said, like in the new generations of this, essentially they're like, these viruses, these just might be like the new version of the cold or the flu, that moving 10, 20, 30 years into the future, we may just have like a half dozen or a dozen strains of these constantly in circulation to some degree. And that there's almost basically like, there'll be almost nothing you can do about it. That they'll just be like the new level of it. Now, reality can change on a dime without explaining itself. That is true. But with projections moving forward, there could be a number of these just constantly in circulation throughout the earth. And, you know, that gives rise to things like people wanting virtual reality at home. That gives rise to a number of either like antisocial or slightly dystopian, you know, futures, if you want to go that way. Of course, there's probably ways to solve all of these, like to find cures. Obviously, preventative health is going to be a big deal moving forward into, I guess, like lessons learned, right? So if we're going to design nationalized healthcare moving forward, which that has a lot of political and social obstacles in America especially, but even like 100 years from now, it doesn't have to be with us, it should be with us, but like even if it's 100 years from now, these are going to be the case studies that engineers and architects look to get this data to figure out how to like implement these things. So we just have to try to be as accurate as we can, so that it's not always about our generation. It's about, yeah, whatever, like 3, 4, 5 generations down the road, if they want to reach back into this data, they can use it to design a proper system. And so this will be the other case that they need, combined with the 09 case, to see what's going on. So while we're doing that, and we're going through a lot of introspection and examining our institutions and all that type of thing, you know, we have to examine our lifestyles, our choices, what we're going through, the nature of our social behavior. It's basically like God put everybody on a timeout or grounded us. And nobody likes to be grounded. And Americans, we're bred from day one to be anti anybody eroding our, you know, liberties or freedom, you know, whether it's like the guy down the street or God. It's just like a juvenile reflex. They're like, no, that's not going to happen. And in these cases, since it's an existential force causing it, there's not a face attached to it, even though people want there to be a face of it. There can't be, because it's just force in nature. Then it's people taking that energy and that drive, and they're starting to examine all the connections to them. And, you know, obviously when you pause the matrix, people go, oh, okay, cool, now it's time to figure it out. And so while people that aren't in positions of power are figuring things out individually in our own worlds, you know, the government already had their bazaar, and they just pumped out a bunch of free money to all these corporations, and they redid the relationship between the government and the corporations. So, and you can analyze that all you want, but that's what they got. So the government did get something. It wasn't something for nothing. It wasn't just like free government handouts. It was also renewed types of financial relationships with these corporations, which is difficult because if you actually understand how the law works, and especially at that scale of money, it's almost impossible to try to enact any type of control or accountability to corporations to get above a certain threshold of money. I mean, they brought Wells Fargo in and put $3 billion fine on them, and they're still in business, right? Apple's like liquidity is it's like $70 billion. It's like an insane amount of money. It's way more than that, actually. To the point where they have more liquidity than a bunch of countries. So that was like the federal government solution. Okay, we're going to get something for this money. And so they have some form of a new relationship with a bunch of these corporations they get money to. You know, and now people are looking for the same thing. They go, okay, cool. There's a pause. Everything's going to change. Everybody's going to come back different. How are we going to move into the future? Because that's what's going to happen. When we come out of this, it doesn't matter who you are. You're going to know, like, okay, now we're in the future. Whatever that means to people. And then, you know, one of the big things we have to figure out is the economy. Federal Reserve, they're just pumping money in. People have analyzed this all day long before this event, and you know that the way the Federal Reserve works is fiat currency. That trips people out. It's just paper backed by nothing. But the idea that if it was on the gold standard, if you get to the end of that chain, you go, oh, now this paper is backed by a rock. I mean, it's an equally absurd notion to think that, like, that's a slightly better system than it, like, I mean, because really, when you get to the end of the fiat money system, sure, it's just paper and numbers on a computer, and you go, oh, it's like at the end of the trail, it's backed by nothing. But really, it's backed by civilization itself. It loops back into itself, to be fair. It's like the idea that the money is backed by relationships and connections and the flow of energy and all these things. And it's not that the Federal Reserve can't be replaced, or, you know, or that it shouldn't be. It probably should be. They should, like, according to the Constitution, Congress has two main powers. One is write legislation, two is to run the economy. And they signed that away to the Federal Reserve, which makes it difficult for the government to run properly. For the government to run properly, Congress needs to run the economy, at least by the design of the Constitution. So they could issue a crypto dollar, transfer all the debts over. They could, like, negotiate a transfer over. Problem is, the people that run the Federal Reserve and the central bank are the people that they're not going to allow that to happen without a fight. The people who invented the money game aren't going to let the money game walk out the door. And they got some friends who would probably, you know, not be happy about that transition either, to put it mildly. But when you look at the trend of what the central banking economic engine has done to its client states in, like, South America, North America, Western Europe, if you look at the general data trends of it's supposed to be a stable economy, it's supposed to be a stable economic engine, it's supposed to, like, promote growth and prosperity and all these things, and you look at all the client states and you see how much hyperinflation, war, poverty, and disease their economic engine has caused in all of the sample of all the different client states that have used their product, which is the central banking system. You have a case for breach of contract for them selling us a bad economic engine to all these places. And that's not even emotional, that's just business. They just sold us a bad product, and you just go, okay, so you have two choices. You can either fire them, fire the client, get rid of their product, which in this case is just central banking, or you renegotiate with them and you tell them all the things that you need change. Like, yeah, we don't want compounding interest. Yeah, we don't want, like, fill in the blank, like all these conversion rates, or, like, we don't want you guys, like, calling the shots on it. Like, there's all these things that can be renegotiated prior to completely withdrawing from the system, because that withdrawing from the system is going to trigger a retaliatory response from their network. So, you know, that's just how it rolls, because their system is backed by guns of the other people at the bigger table that they all sit at. So basically you need to negotiate a better version of the product they've given us, which I think we're in the initial stages of that, but it's always tough to tell because it's a dirty game and a lot of that game is played in stealth. But all this type of stuff is rolling through, and then, you know, along with social consequences, health consequences, spiritual awareness, and everything's up for grabs right now. So I think once you, in its totality, once you assess all this stuff, you go, oh, okay, we're going through some kind of planetary ascension, you know, on the plus side. And on the low side, you're going, well, we're at least getting a matrix break and, you know, possibly upgrade. So it's a great change happening, and it's all being catalyzed by a virus, okay? So the virus itself it's uncertain, and the uncertainty arises from not just people questioning their own mortality or what their own personal health future is going to be in the near term. It's also triggered by the fact that now this virus is catalyzing these much more major changes, and society is going to be shut down for, I don't know, at least a month or two. And so when it comes back, it's going to be completely different. And right now, we're figuring out the things we want. So one of the things I like is that oil is plunging. Coincidentally, Saudi Arabia and a few other oil-producing countries, or I guess maybe it's just Saudi Arabia, they just dumped a bunch of oil on the market. They upped their oil production like a month ago. And now, global demand just went through the floor. So they say gas is going to head down to like $1 a gallon. This is hilarious now because there's a huge dent in the fossil fuel game. And that's another thing we need. If we're really going to move into like the future, we got to have free energy. We got to have clean fuel. We got to have environmentally harmonious design across the boards for everything, as you know, as quickly as we can. And a lot of people say that there's suppressed technology, which that's been, if you look in history, that's true, because I lived through, it was a conspiracy theory for the longest time that big auto was suppressing electric car technology. In the 80s and 90s, that was actually a conspiracy theory. People like, oh, like some people would just think you were flat out nuts if you really believed that the large automobile manufacturers were suppressing electric car technology. And they also made you believe that electric cars could never be a part of the modern world. They wouldn't have enough range, they wouldn't be made well enough, there's no place you can plug them in. Like, there's a whole list of anti-electric car propaganda that was put out during that time. And now that's all been dispelled. Like, Tesla broke through. Not only is the electric car viable, it turns out that it's essentially a better car in almost every imaginable way. And with that market penetration, people seem to have forgot that, yeah, Big Auto did conspire to stop electric technology. They did. That's a fact. That's a provable fact now. But people don't give credit to those people that fought against that, right? It's the same way where all these 60s hippies told us how great marijuana would be. They did. They told us how great marijuana would be. They said, oh, marijuana should be legal. And the institutions, the establishment said, no, if marijuana is ever legal, Western civilization is going to fall. The establishment in the 60s, they were sure on two things. One, if we lost the war in Vietnam, that the entire world would be communist. So, welcome to communism, comrade. They were sure that if we lost Vietnam, we'd all be communists. And they were sure that if marijuana ever got close to being legal, let alone legal, the Western civilization we know would fall. No civility, no productivity, no ethics, it would all go, right? Those are the two things they were sure about. Well, I'm sitting in Los Angeles at a time where we definitely lost the Vietnam War, and I can definitely go down to my local dispensary and get high. And we're still here. And electric cars succeeded. And last year, the government admitted that UFOs are real. And they started Space Force. And we're starting to find out we don't need a lot of the old institutions that we had in the world. And it's not that we have to throw them all in the garbage can. Some of them just need to be upgraded for modern times, and upgraded to a point where these institutions are compatible with a more ideal future that we're projecting. See how that works? Projecting and projecting. Once you project your vision, you project your vision, and that turns into a project on the ground. So you project it, and then it turns into a project. So as long as these institutions are upgraded to a point where they can be compatible with what we want to project into the future. So if we want free energy, you know, let's say we want like free energy, teleportation, free healthcare, like Star Trek world. We'll just say Star Trek world, right? Free food, shelter, economy, transportation's all taken care of, all that stuff. We just have to make sure that the institutions, our core institutions, governments, fire departments, police departments, whatever, fill in the blank, like small businesses, eateries, coffee shops, all that stuff. We just make sure that they are all at least compatible with all that stuff. They don't have to be on that level. They just have to be able to work with it and go back to, you know, being able to like control the levers on it, so that we can have a society that we can sort of govern and control to a certain extent, you know. And what does that mean now? I mean, one, we're gonna have to get through this health scare together, this health emergency, this health crisis, and be compassionate as we can be and get through it, but then also be professional about it, so we can get the lessons learned that we need for us and for future generations to have information from this to learn from. And that's how we can have a responsibility to generations beyond us and not be just super selfish pieces of shit, because we're not. Because we are good enough to be able to deal with the crisis and also be responsible adults, not just to ourselves, not just to our friends and family, but to those that are going to come after us. And that's important. That's how we keep this thing going, and that's how we evolve as a society together. That at least some of us have this mindset, and then we can distribute that. And I feel like we're being able to do that as best we can. You know, we're gonna have to. There's gonna have to be a lot of corruptions and systems in various forms are gonna have to be dealt with. Efficiencies are gonna have to be upgraded, and we're gonna have to have real discussions about, in real ways, with each other as mature adults. And, you know, along the way, yeah, some of us are gonna get we're gonna find out some of our ideologies are wrong, and some of our feelings are gonna get hurt, and some of us are gonna be in shock from things that we were ignorant of, and it turns out they're true. And that's one of the weirdest kinds of shock, is to go from ignorance into awareness without asking for it. And you find yourself there, and you ask yourself, how did I get here? And you know, so, you know, this is a bit of a rambling podcast. Thanks for hanging in there with me, especially for those of you listening to it out there. If you're viewing it, hey, at least you got a cool cloudscape behind me. If you don't like what I'm saying, at least you can just turn the volume off and watch pretty clouds behind the professional looking guy. Ugh, who knows? Well, thanks for joining me. I'm really sure what else to say about this subject. Just, if you're out there and you're going through this, stay safe, keep mentally and emotionally healthy as best you can, and have a great one.